Thank you very much. I believe we have enjoyed our tea and the accompaniments. I would like to take this session, this opportunity to invite Professor Grace Njoroge, who will be our moderator for the next session on technology, research, and climate change, to give the overview of the sub-theme and actually take charge of the session. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I take this very special opportunity to welcome each one of us to session 7 of our conference, which started yesterday. And our theme is one of those that none of us should miss, not just to listen, but to reflect very critically on what we are doing in regard to technology research and climate change. I'll take the first 5 minutes just to give us the overview of what our very distinguished researchers and discussants are going to talk about. And I'll begin the overview by giving 2 brief remarks. The first remark is that we have been on the journey towards managing environmental sustainability for a very long time. If we use, for example, the date of 1995, when we had the first Conference of Parties in Berlin, but more significantly, the 2015 landmark, when we got the first legally binding agreement on managing climate change in the Paris Agreement. The second remark I want to bring out has to do with how significant that agreement was, because when it is legally binding, it means that as nations who are signatories to the agreement, we are bound by that agreement. The major issue that concerns our theme is the fact that development of technology and the transfer therein in managing climate change, adaptation, and mitigation was a major commitment. So as we think about this theme, we also look at some of the provisions of the Paris Agreement, particularly Article 14, whereby there is provision for stock take, that parties will do a stock take to look at the actions that have been put in place, as well as the progress made, and under the enhanced transparency framework, which takes place or begins or commences in 2024, then the year 2023 becomes very critical for us, because we will be beginning a process of looking at what exactly, as nations, as a region in Eastern Africa, have we done in the area of research, technology, and climate change. And hence, a core element of the Africa Climate Summit, the COP28, that is coming towards the end of the year, we need to think through what our position is going to be. In this session, we are grateful that GLOSEPS has invited very distinguished researchers who will bring to our attention some of the key messages in regard to the role of research in climate change mitigation and adaptation, with particular reference to how research outputs ought to direct the implementation of national plans on climate change, and also bringing us to the level of understanding what are those mechanisms or those actions that are actually at work, are cost-effective for upskilling. The other part that we will emphasize on is the matter of ICT. There are many diverse opportunities in especially digital technologies that would be very important to us in either identifying the threats in climate change, because we truly understand that technology is an enabler in climate change adaptation and mitigation. The other point on ICT is to look at our plans in the region, and even as a nation in Kenya, and understand whether we have an enabling policy or a policy framework that actually supports the implementation of technology in our climate change and mitigation. Those coming from our country will realize that our National Climate Change Action Plan was scheduled for 2018 to 2022, so it is under review. And our researchers will help us to really understand whether really we have matters, technology, research in the right place. We'll also look at what are the technologies, for example, in the area of energy, that we need to consider as critical in our mitigation plans. We will have a very exhaustive, I wish we had more time, discussion around renewable energies and how and where we are at in implementing or mainstreaming renewable energy in our plans. We have areas of governance and policy, especially as a region. How are we working? Are we coordinated well enough to make impact in climate change mitigation? Is it possible that we need to evaluate the matter of the center-periphery dichotomy as we look at the greater emitters, nations that emit more, against those that are not as emitting as much? And what is our position in this? I just want to mention that since yesterday, I've heard about a number of us asking, why are we not talking about gender? Of course, I'm not happy that we talked about women, but women is not equal to gender. We're just saying, are there inequalities when we come to either information flow, whether in adaptation plans, do we need to do more? So in this session, we're going to bring gender considerations in our discussions. With those few comments, allow me to invite our team of experts. I want to believe that Colonel Dr. James Kimiu is in the house. Thank you, you're welcome. You talk to us about strategy for adaptation of ICT and related technologies. Our expert is a senior lecturer at the National Defense University, Kenya, a strategist, and you will hear him when he comes on the floor. Welcome to the podium. Then we will have a presenter on governance dimensions in climate change, by Dr. Mumo Nzao. I want to believe, Daktari, you are here. He's a political scientist and a consultant researcher. Is Mumo in the house or online? We will see. Dr. Mumo Nzao, we will find out. Then we also have another presenter, Dr. Western Shilaho. Thank you. Welcome to the podium. And he'll talk about climate change governance and instability in East Africa. And he's a research fellow in the Institute of Pan-African Thought and Conversation, University of Johannesburg. And then a good lady, Dr. Jacinta Mawel. I hope thank you. Jacinta is in the room, a senior lecturer in the University of Nairobi in the area of philosophy and media. Welcome, Daktari. She's the one who will take us through the gender and information ecosystems in climate change adaptation in rural Kenya. And then we'll have a very senior engineer, Engineer Joseph Kifere. Are you there, Engineer Joseph? Very senior leader in our country, welcome. Former PS in the Ministry of Energy, welcome, sir. And has also been MD in the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. Very, very well versed with the subject of the nexus between renewable energy, climate change, and security. And then we will have a presentation from India. I believe this will be online, on climate change adaptations in the maritime ecosystems. And it will be done by Dr. Chaim Yudon. After we've done this, then I want to confirm that Professor Iraki is in the house or online. There he is. We'll be inviting Professor Iraki, who is an associate professor of economics in Kentucky State University, media commentator. Most of us have read his columns in our daily papers. So then, allow me, with those comments and with our team already here with us, welcome Colonel Dr. James Kimiu to take the podium. Welcome. Let's give him an appreciation as he comes.
Thanks.
10 minutes.
10 minutes. We can have the slides. We'll begin the countdown after the slides have been loaded. Thank you. So I'm Colonel Dr. James Kimuyu, a senior lecturer at the National Defense University, Kenya, one of the institutions of national strategic importance, chartered to be able to offer training and also research in matters of national security and strategy. Okay. I'm still waiting for my slides. I hope this is not on air. It can be cut if it is. So, all right, thank you for the slides. So what we are presenting here, let's go to the first one, which is where we have the title of the presentation. The title is on adoption of ICT in the implementation of climate change action plan, both within Kenya and also in the region. And we are saying that there's increase in what we are calling computing power and also related technologies. And these continue to expand. We all know that computers have come a long way, all the way from the first generation in the 1940s through the second generation, the third generation. You can move forward now, the fourth generation, up to, okay, I can see it here. Up to the current fifth generation, which we all know that began in the 80s and we are still in it. From the medieval use of technology where we had people using sticks, bones, and stones to count, all the way to the invention of the abacus, the Napier bone, the introduction of the pascaline, up to the current technologies that we are having today. We are saying that ICT has come a long way and is one of the tools that cannot be ignored in this battle against climate change. So we are saying that ICT-enabled penetration is key to be able to support climate change. There is a need to integrate ICT as a central pillar in the global national climate change efforts. So this research, therefore, focused on reviewing the National Climate Change Action Plan. And I saw two documents. That is the one that ran from 2013 to 2017. We had another one that ran from 2018 to 2022. I've been working to get the one for 2023, but I'm happy somebody has clarified that it is still under development. So what are the likely roles of ICT, or what is ICT bringing when it comes to the climate change effort? A look at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that is the UNFCCC, it has made it clear that the use of technology is key to issues of climate change. Additionally, okay, we're supposed to be here. Sorry for the technology. Additionally, a look at the Paris Agreement, that is on article number 10, part 4. It has clearly establishes the technology framework that seeks to promote and also enhance action on technology development and transfer. However, in our research, this is what we were able to find, that much of what is being discussed here is non-ICT technologies. Just to name a few, things to do with wind energy, I have no problem with that. Solar power, the hydro power, development of drought-resistant crops, deployment of early warning systems, and the aspect of seawalls. But we are saying this, that ICT is critical, and it needs to be explicitly and clearly stated as one of the key enablers to the fight against climate change. Our research found that ICT role transcends the two key policy response areas. That is the area of mitigation of climate change to reduce greenhouse gases emissions, and also in the area of adaptation to climate change to minimize the risks that are posed by the consequences of the climate change. We are therefore saying that ICT can be used to can be a key or a tool to support climate change in monitoring climate change trends, data collection to provide the critical input for processing, can be used to process or to disseminate information, enhance environmental protection, reduce carbon emissions, boost food security, among others. Allow me to go straight now to the National Climate Change Action Plan, which covers the following areas. It has identified what we are calling priority action areas. It has composed what we call a task force for its implementation. It has an entry or a coverage on technology. It also covers issues of capacity development and lastly allocating the roles, coordination, monitoring and evaluation and funding, and we'll be able to see where ICT is anchored or is not anchored and therefore I'll be able to make a policy recommendation concerning this as we develop the third edition of this plan. These are the priority areas as captured in our national climate change action, all the way from priority number 1 to priority number 7. The plan is good and it seeks to strengthen the country's path towards what we are calling a sustainable and climate resilient development. The priority areas covers through the aspects of disaster, food and nutrition, water and sanitation, forest health and sanitation, manufacturing and energy. But as an ICT expert and as a researcher, my conclusion is simple, and I believe that as we review, we'll be able to take this into consideration, that ICT is not identified as a climate change priority area. All achieve these priority areas. And we found that these exclusions, therefore, is inhibiting ICT growth in the areas of climate change action. I believe there are many potentials that ICT provides for us to be able to fight climate change. Going forward is the area of the composition of the task force, as shown. A long list, which we found, of course, being led by the what we may call the key ministry, environment, climate change and forestry, followed by National Treasury, Economic Planning, Ministry of Energy, Transport, all the way to Water, Agriculture, Office of the Attorney General, and the rest as shown. As a researcher, again, this task force, we were able to find that it clearly lacks the representation of the key Ministry of Information, Communications, and the digital economy to be able to specifically address issues related to ICT use and optimization to deliver on these action plan goals and objectives. Of course, this exclusion also includes the National Commission for Science and Technology. We know this is the national body that is mandated to be able to mainstream STI. And of course, this exclusion also denies or limits the investment that is to be done in this area. Number 3, we looked at how it captures now the aspects of technology and innovation. The plan clearly identifies technology and innovation as an enabler to its achievement. It calls for improvement in terms of capacity of the what we call the Kenya Industrial Research and Development Institute, KIRDI. We all know KIRDI in this country, to coordinate the global efforts in climate change action. But the question here is, what is the role of ICT in all this? As earlier said, KIRDI will focus on what we are calling non-ICT technologies. Talk about solar technologies, talk about renewable energy sources, among others. And therefore, we're able to find that the role of ICT here is not explicitly stated as much as the focus on these non-ICT technologies as earlier mentioned. We went further to analyze under capacity development. The plan again seeks to develop capacity and also promote knowledge, putting emphasis on the aspects of operation of publicly accessible National Climate Change Resource Center, which is good, also maintaining an up-to-date climate change knowledge management system, and also an updated climate change information portal. After that mentioning, it went quiet on how those are supposed to be implemented. And clearly, as you can be able to see, these require a robust, secure, and efficient ICT system. So these measures, as already stated, again, fails to explicitly identify ICT and related technology as essential support tools. I hope my time is not up.
have a minute. Standing by your side for the last
Okay.
critical mention that you might, maybe the very last
Allow
one.
me to finish.
Thank you.
On the roles, and that is monitoring and coordination again. As I said earlier, the Ministry of ICT is again not included. Allow me now to just go straight to the recommendation that I put forward. I've developed what we are calling a three-stage adoption strategy that I believe that the team that is working on the current plan that is running 2023, I believe for the next 5 years to 2027, 2028 should be able to consider as a researcher. So I'll not belabor on it. It's available on my paper, beginning from, of course, the requirements generation all the way to its use and to its eventual maturity. Allow me just to make policy recommendations in 1 second. One, of course, is to prioritize the use of ICT to support climate change, bring ICT as a debate within all our forums so that we may be able to develop key technology responses. Of course, review relevant laws to be able to capture ICT as an enabler. This is also activate funding. Of course, enhance the role of ICT in the implementation of all these protocols that we have in place. And lastly, be able to consider the framework or the strategy as proposed. And with those few remarks, I say thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's appreciate Dr. Kimuyu. Very clear message that as a nation, we haven't quite anchored matters ICT in our action plans, and it's something we can do and do it in a way that we recognize even the latest technologies in ICT. Thank you, Dr. Kimuyu. Allow me to recognize Dr. Mumo, who has joined us. You're welcome. But allow me to ask Dr. Shilaho to come before you, and then you come after him. Dr. Shilaho, thank you.
All protocol observed. Are my slides somewhere in the process?
Meanwhile, if there's
They're
something
coming
you
in.
want to say about yourself.
thanks.
Oh, it's there.
Great.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, when I saw the call for papers on this particular topic, I had to rack my head. What do I talk about? Because climate change issues can be, so to say, boring, you know, talking about fossil fuels, lithium battery, and those kind of things. In political science, there are a whole host of things that really generate a lot of adrenaline. And there seems to be consensus. So I had to see what is the entry point. Press to increase. Oh, there. Yes. There. So, my thesis is that climate change ought to be analyzed within what I call the ecosystem of predation, colonialism and imperialism, which brings out the inequitable global power dispersal between the global north and the global south. And particularly Africa usually holds the wrong end of the stick when it comes to this kind of politics. And I'm saying, what is the antidote? Governance And how do you make sense of governance in Africa, and particularly in East Africa? My area of focus, you'll have to train your attention on the state in Africa. We have not sufficiently theorized the state in Africa to appreciate not only matters to do with climate change, but a whole host of things. So I take a survey of a couple of states within the region, and I say, for instance, Kenya, the anchor state within the East African and Horn region. I see a lot of colonial hangover in Kenya. And that talks to the legitimacy of the state in Kenya. The legitimacy of the state in Kenya is alien. It's not anchored in the people of Kenya. And therefore, the conversation and politics around climate change are driven by external actors. And when they're driven by external actors, it's highly unlikely that the strategies, the mitigation efforts we're talking about are going to respond to the peculiar needs, concerns, and aspirations of the Kenyan people. A critical example is yesterday I read social media, and the Kenyan president had tweeted that Bill Gates is to be lauded for transforming lives in Kenya. That sent me thinking, how could Bill Gates do that in Kenya? Because Bill Gates is a controversial figure, even in his home country, the United States. And talking about agriculture, about public health, about climate change, he's a controversial figure. So I'm not so sure he can transform lives in Kenya, in Africa, or in the global south. But that kind of statement and thinking informs the legitimacy of the state in Kenya, which has to change. Then we go to DRC, the resource scarce, the geological carcass, as it were, a country that has always been beset by a whole host of challenges to do with the politics, to do with governance, to do with political stability, back since before independence. And it has remained as such. And therefore, governance is of more existential problem in DRC than climate change. If we get governance in DRC, we can even statistically talk about the kind of lives that have been lost as a result of bad governance, which I don't think climate change is going to claim in the future. Ethiopia, there's that clash about the centrifugal force, the tension between the central government, the federal state, and the periphery. That tension has not been resolved, and that's why we're having all these problems. The recent civil war, and currently there is this emergency in the Amharic region. Those kind of things pose a far greater challenge to Ethiopia than climate change. And if they got their governance intact, they'll be in a better position to resolve the problem of climate change. South Sudan, the militarization of politics, that has to be resolved. It's of much more critical importance to South Sudan than climate change. How is it possible to ensure that there's inclusivity as far as power and the exercise of power, governance, institutions going forward, elections, and that kind of thing to legitimize the state in South Sudan? Eritrea is a gulag, absolutist state, you know. What do you do about that? And we're not paying great attention to that. We'll challenge later. Then Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Djibouti. We're talking about third-termism, you know, this staying in power for an uninterrupted period of time. That is a great challenge to governance as opposed to climate change. The colonial legacy in Rwanda, in Burundi, that's of greater challenge than climate change. That has to be resolved. And then personal rule, politics that is not embedded in institutions, in the rule of law, of greater challenge. Djibouti, it's a military base. Yes, I'm getting there. Djibouti, for instance, is a geopolitical outpost, a military base of all sorts of countries. Demilitarization is also important if you have to address the climate change question. Emitters also come from okay, there. So ideology and climate change, which takes me to the politics of climate change, post-colonialism. It's about the knowledge. When you talk about research, who does research? Whose ideas count more than the other? It's always from the global north. That's where scholarship is said to emanate from, and then those ideas are implemented in the global south. And which why this scholar talks about the coloniality of knowledge that transforms colonial subjects into victims of the coloniality of being, a condition of inferioralization, peripheralization, and dehumanization. That kind of politics is important to appreciate investment in research, who is investing in this research, how relevant is this research, and to who. So when we talk about indigenous knowledges, our African government, if they don't invest in research, investments from abroad is not going to resolve the challenges we face, including climate change. Which why coloniality of knowledge is important. Research, technology, epistemologies, who does that? Coloniality of power. Foucault, Gramsci, they talk about power, the ideology of power. How do we understand power? Power from the global north, power from the global south. How do we deconstruct that? Then whiteness in conservation, that's a key issue. How about looking at conservation as also from the global south? Donor recipient, binary politics. What is in it for me? Globalization between the global north and global south. And the politics of inequality, injustice, elitism between global north, global south, and also within the south, south, and intrastate. So what is the global south doing very fast to address? Yes. So regional economic communities have a role to play as far as climate change is concerned. South-South cooperation, for instance, the BRICS is taking place in Johannesburg now, but climate change is not an issue. What we do, and then decolonization of knowledge, smash and grab. When we get things from abroad, we smash and see what's relevant to us, and we leave what's not relevant to us, as opposed to taking also everything on board. Resilience. I've seen resilience as a word that is so ubiquitous. Resilience, when it's used especially in reference to people in the global south and in Africa, what it simply means is that these people have got this staying capacity. No matter how much problems you subject them to, they'll actually emerge victorious. They've got this staying power, tenacity. So it's a problematic word. We have to do what it takes to ensure that the lives of these people do not make them to put up with things that they do not have to put up with, which are those who have a red gender. Women sometimes are taught to be resilient, and African women, how can they be resilient? There are those problems that they have to be helped to overcome. Conclusion. My thesis is that climate change politics, mitigation and adaptation boil down to governance anchored in sovereignty. So if our governments don't anchor whatever they do in the sovereignty of their people, their aspirations, their interests, I don't think we're going to move forward, which why there's this nexus between climate change, political instability, and life-negating attributes of bad governance. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Shilaho. Everybody is entitled to their opinion. That's why we have a communique at the end of this conference on what we all agree about. I would like to bring to you Dr. Mumo to continue the discourse on governance. Thank you, Dr. Mumo.
It's there on the seat.
Colleagues, I'm Dr. Mumo Nzau from the National Defense University. I'm based at the National Defense College, Karen. And hearing what my predecessor said, I'm here to talk about the governance dimensions. Yes, ma'am. The governance dimensions of the climate change adaptation discourse. What policy options But let me connect a little bit from what the Honorable Doctor said is, I think I can see Professor Munene sitting there. I think there are 3 approaches to African issues. You can take a Marxist one, and they tell us we have developed, we have come here, but there is a historical relationship to it, which is skewed. And that is what he's talking about, and the colonial legacy and all that. The other one would be to see what other people have done and try to catch up, which was the modernization prescription. You remember that Aristotelian thesis. But more importantly, the statist approach. And if you remember Naomi Chazan and others in that approach, the idea that so far we've been colonized and all these things have happened to us, what have we done for ourselves? And I think that is where I want to make my entry point into this research program of governance. Because governance is wide. So you talk about institutional governance, economic governance, and generally governance in the political sense in terms of the relationship between those in power and those they lead and that kind of thing. But I think here institutionally is critical. Now remember, the levels of governance in a discussion about global climate change are not just at the state. Fine, the state is the unit of analysis here, but also we are talking about the state, yes, and within the structures within states, but also regions. We are here as Africa. We are preparing for the Africa Climate Change Summit, yeah? And we're talking also about global governance structures. And so it's a discourse that is a little bit broader. And the other day, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was saying the era of global warming is going. We are talking about global boiling, and we have to talk with each other. Even if we talk at each other and we say the problem is at the doorstep of the West, and everyone else must be carried on the back, then there's going to be a problem. So my argument here is that we are looking at Agenda 2063. We are looking at the UN SDG goals by 2063. 2030. And there is an issue here. I wonder if I'm able to move my slides just a little. So there's an issue here about climate adaptation, how to adapt, as it were. So very quickly, I wonder if it will move. Yeah, right there. So we just go straight to the objectives. I don't know if I'm making any progress with it. Is it just had a few slides? Oh dear. Okay. Let me go here. So let me just say here that I set out to examine the interplay between the governance discourse, the complexity, and the policy options there for Eastern Africa, to assess the current discourse, to analyze the impact of governance dynamics on climate change adaptation efforts in Eastern Africa, and then explore the complexities here. And basically, my main argument here is that, fine, we know the extent to which these issues have played out. Of course, Eastern Africa stands out with a lot of vulnerabilities, some of them purely in the governance in the context that we were talking about, in terms of institutions, in terms of the culture, the socio-political culture. Do our people appreciate what is happening to the environment? And have we put enough, the legal institutional environment to ensure that it can cope with these issues? So adaptation, there are a lot of issues there. Then I had the whole idea of, really the governance dynamics here and the complexities therein. Let me just go in there. For example, when we talk about governance, one important thing is commitments. everything we sign on to, for example, what was happening at COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh and all that, governments make commitments about what they will do about this problem. In as much as this is disagreement into the nature of the problem and where it is coming from and who is most responsible for it, people have got to agree that we have these structures in place. We have the Global Environmental Facility and all these other commitments that governments have made. Have we cascaded these to our own local structures? Have we capacity built? Have we built an institutional culture that is really living up to our commitments as countries, the commitments we have made towards climate adaptation, climate action? That is one. The other one is commitments we have made at the sub-regional, wider regional level. Countries meet somewhere, commit. Sometimes they send the heads of state to a summit. The heads of state tell their ministers, now can you go and cascade this and work it out? Are we really walking the talk? So have we capacity built? How much in terms of our own national budgets, for example, are we taking there so that we can have the change? Climate, education, sensitization, and so on. So sort of mainstreaming the whole idea of adaptation. Have we turned this whole discussion into a talk shop where we meet, look at the ideals, and make commitments, but really not follow through? And I think it goes back to governance, because if the structures and processes of governance are done well, then it can work. A scholar called Goran Hayden said that there are three empirical dimensions of governance. One is citizen oversight, our citizens oversighting the institutions properly. The other one is a social reciprocity. Citizens, you just walk out here in Nairobi and every other city you go, and you find people just, it starts with you in your house. Up to the corporate entities and the whole thing. Are we really fully sensitized, and are we taking this thing the way it ought to be taken? You remember when we had COVID, I was still carrying my mask here, just in case they say something, take cover, and that kind of thing. Professor Moneni, remember, used to come with a shield over and above that. Are we taking these things seriously? Because Guterres was saying it is a catastrophe. So how well have we nuanced this? Then commitments at the global level. There's a bit of blame game there. So many $1 trillion, I think it was $100 million or something, and something like that. Countries have committed, but what about the follow-through? For example, in the context of the loss and damage fund, there are a lot of things that have happened in the environment since Sharm el-Sheikh, including catastrophes that happened, the fires in Europe and this kind of thing, the extremities and so on. How are we compensating governments? How are we compensating or making up for the loss and damage? And how much is that exactly weighted? And how do we get out of this feeling that somebody is to blame? Because if this blame game continues, we will not look at things in absolute terms, but rather in relative terms. And I think looking at it in absolute terms and being honest about commitments at the institutional, legal, and all these levels of governance, up to the ordinary person, as we talk about our bottom-up model and this kind of thing, how do we nuance this thing so that everybody then can play their part? If everybody does not play their part, I'm sorry, there will be a problem. And if it's like this climate thing is everybody's problem and therefore nobody's. So, we've got to think about things in terms of those aspects of governance, institutions, capacity building, and walking the talk. Thank you very much for that one, and wonderful.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mumo. Sorry about the time, but I'm sure you put all the rest of the conversation in the paper. Allow us now to have Dr. Maweo on gender issues. Thank you. Welcome, Madam.
Thank you. I hope the ICT people, you can just click for me instead of me struggling with this. So my name is Jacinta Maweo. I'm from the University of Nairobi. I am a senior lecturer in philosophy and media studies. That is my background. My background is in both philosophy and media studies. And I'm here to present part of findings from a collaborative research project between researchers from the University of Nairobi, the University of, okay, so there it is. So then the title of my presentation is Gender and Information Ecosystems. I think it's easier for me to face there instead of me facing at the back. So gender and information ecosystems in climate change adaptation in rural Kenya. And as I've said, you guys, if you can just go next for me. I don't know. Okay, thank you. So I am presenting part of findings from collaborative research, bringing together colleagues from the University of Leeds in the UK, from the University of Ghana, and the University of Nairobi. So our aim was to try and understand the accessibility and usability of climate change. We can go next. Information among rural communities. And although we were interested in both men and women, we had a bias for women because we do recognize the centrality of women in rural households. And we also appreciate that climate change, although it does affect everybody, as just Dr. Mumo has just said, that it's a problem for all of us. So as much as we do appreciate that climate change does affect both men and women, we do also recognize that women are at the center of providing services in the household that are directly affected by climate change, such as food, water, fuel, and all of that. So the project aims, go back, the project aims, one was to establish how rural communities understand and interpret climate change. And we also wanted to establish the sources of climate change information in rural communities. We can go next. And we also wanted to understand the flow, the availability, the accessibility and usability of climate change information among members of rural community, and as I've said, with a special focus on women. And lastly, we wanted to understand how the accessibility or inaccessibility of climate change information affects women's capacity to build resilience and to better adapt to climate change. So let's go next. So I'm only going to present the findings, part of the findings on Kenya. So this study was carried in different periods between 2019 and 2021. And the study sites were Makueni, Kisumu, Kilifi, and Kwale. And our methodology, we adopted a qualitative methodology. What we did was some structured interviews. We did key informant interviews. We did FGDs, and we also did what we are calling quasi-ethnography. Quasi-ethnography because it wasn't a strict ethnography because ethnography does take long. So what we were doing is that we were having our research assistants stay with and follow women for about 2 weeks so that they can understand the lived experiences of those women so that they can gather information about where they get information from and how climate change has affected their daily lives. So whom did we talk to? We talked to, as I've said, both men and women with more women. And we also did key informant interviews with meteorologists, with journalists, with agricultural officers, with county government officers, with NGO representatives, etc. And the aim was for us to map the flow of information within the larger climate change information ecosystem. Next, the rationale for this was that, of course, we do appreciate that climate change, effective climate change communication is at the center of empowering communities to better adapt to climate change, not just rural communities, all of us. For us to be able to to adapt to climate change, then we need to have the necessary information that guides us to understand how we should better adapt to climate change. So we're saying if communities, rural communities were provided with effective climate change communication, then information, then they would be in a better place to build their resilience to survive and even to, to overcome the impacts of climate change. So what sort of information is available? Why were we interested in what sort of information? Because, of course, we were not assuming that there isn't information, but then we wanted to know how usable and how, not usable, but how useful is this information. So then let's go to the findings. Let's move. Okay, so our findings on the understanding of climate change, we found that there is a general, a fairly good understanding of climate change among the members that we talked to, and they explained climate change through its impacts, which makes sense. Next, what we were asking them, so what do they think causes climate change? And interestingly, they do understand, most or all of those we talked to thought that it is largely man-made, human activities are the center of the impacts of climate change, whereas others also told us that they think it's God's doing, that it's punishment from God, that we're not doing what we should do. Next. And then sources of climate information, where do they get it from? They get it from what we are calling experts, like extension officers, chiefs, and of course, weather forecasts from KMDs. And what was interesting for us is to find out that these people trust their indigenous ways of knowing more than the climate science information from weather forecast and the others. Why? Because they say that, the information that they get from radio, from TV, from the chiefs, from the county officers, as predicted by KMD, is inaccurate. That all that it'll rain, it doesn't rain. But then they were giving us examples of where, like there is this tree, and when it flowers, we know for sure next week it'll rain, and it does rain. So that was something that we thought interesting. So media, radio and mobile, radio and TV was the most used source of information, and also there was capacity building from NGOs. Next. Yes. So about the information ecosystem, we say that there is a weak information ecosystem. Why? Next, because there is lack of listening infrastructures. that these women are knowledgeable, or these people at the grassroots are knowledgeable, but then the top-down information chain does not take into account what they know. They do know the information deficits, they know what should be done, but then nobody is taking into account that. Next, let's go to the conclusion. Uh, 10 minutes is a short time. Okay, so then what do we conclude? That the main thing that we can say is that information, those who are in charge of ensuring that information reaches the ultimate end users, who are these people at the grassroots, should ensure that, one, there was language barrier as an impediment to accessing climate information. Why? Because it's disseminated in English and Swahili. And these guys, most of these are illiterate. Therefore, we're saying that they need, climate information should be provided in local languages. And then technology, we're talking about technology, that the increasing availability of mobile phones should be used by policymakers as an avenue to avail more usable and to ensure more accessibility to climate change information. Thank you.
Very much, Dr. Mawao. Very interesting study there. Without any waste of time, would now want to bring Engineer Kibere to take us through his presentation on renewable energy technologies and the possibility that we have there to build resilience for climate change. Welcome, Engineer.
Good morning, distinguished participants. All protocols observed. And in the interest of time, our moderator, the good professor, has done the introduction, so I will not go into that. I will just start by explaining that I have about 7 items in this presentation. The first one I hope it works. You know, it is much easier when you do it yourself. You sort of. So the topic is the nexus between renewable energy, climate change, and security. And what I have done is to create some slides as abstracts, which explains the entire body of this presentation. But there are other very important details, which are in about 5 items, about the energy perspective, the overview of energy in Africa, the renewable energy itself, and I will talk about a very new product of renewable energy, which I think is a game changer. Then the potential resources of renewable energy in the Eastern African region, then climate change and security, and then finally action time of Eastern African region. I have heard everybody concur that this matter is now boiling. It is very urgent. So that is why I called that action time for the Eastern African region, because we need to act. We cannot wait. We cannot procrastinate. We must act, and it must be urgent. So in the abstract, it's very unstable. You need to do something about instability. So fossil fuels that is coal, oil, and gas, contributes a lot. And I have given the figures. And that is about 75% of the global greenhouse gases. So it's a very big contribution. And you know, fossil fuels, oil and gas is mainly used in energy and transportation. I think transportation is about 25%, the rest 50% could be energy. And therefore, these are the main sources of energy. We also acknowledge that energy is a socio-economic enabler. We cannot live without energy. It is in everywhere. Whether you are talking about food security, whether we are talking about industrialization, whether we are about growing from a middle income to a higher middle income, we must talk about industrialization. Again, that is energy. And since it is an enabler, and it is relying so much on coal, oil, and gas, what is it that we must do to still continue having the energy and at the same time continue building our economies without polluting the environment? And that is the answer of this presentation. Renewable energy, which can be defined as energy derived from resources that are regenerative over a short time and for all practical purposes cannot be depleted. When we talk about wind, for example, it continues to blow, it turns the turbine, and it doesn't get depleted. It doesn't get affected. When you talk about hydro energy, the water passes through a river as it is flowing down. Again, it can be used downstream, so it is not depleted. And that is why we call it renewable energy. And we have other sources like solar, we have sources like geothermal, we have sources like biomass. And I will not dwell so much on those because of time, but I will talk about a new product we call kinetic power plant. And this kinetic power plant uses air and water to produce sustainable energy. Not like solar or wind or hydro, which are affected by intermittency. Solar and wind are intermittent. You can't get it throughout. Hydro is affected by vagaries of weather. But the kinetic power plant is the same hydro which is energy generated by falling water. The easiest way for me to explain a common man about the kinetic power plant, although we can go into details with anybody who is interested, is actually to get that water down and look for a way of getting it back upwards, and therefore create a feedback system that makes that water generate electricity throughout. And that is the product, which I think it's a very unique product. And you need very little water, not the much water you have in the rivers, but still you are able to generate power. There are 2 pilot projects which have already been developed. They are operational in Thailand, 100 kilowatts and 500 kilowatts. And the beauty about the product is that it's modular. So if you want more than 500 kilowatts, you just go multiply 500. Even if you want 50 megawatts, all you need to do is to do about 500 times 10. You get 50 megawatts. If you want 500 megawatts, it's 500 times 100. And it occupies a very small space. And therefore, it's quite a good product. So these renewable energy resources are very abundant in the Eastern African region. And I just hope that this will take me to the resources. This energy perspective is purely about what pertains in Africa, the oil, gas. Most of the generation is actually using oil, coal and gas. I think your product has a problem with the battery. So I think I would rather go manual. The technology has failed. But the good thing is this information is available, and I will encourage all of us to go through this information, because it will give you the belief that we can play a very big role in mitigation of climate change. Notwithstanding our challenges, because we have challenges, we have political challenges, we have economic challenges, and so on, but there is still quite a lot that we can do. And what will create a win for this climate change mitigation is not about backpassing. It's not about saying we can't do this because of this. Do what you can do within the prevailing circumstances, because you well know that environment is a very big animal. Whatever it is, political environment, economic environment, you can't change it, you adapt to that environment. So the resources that we have in the Eastern African region are quite abundant. And one of the
Engineer is now concluding.
Yes, I'm concluding. And I can get it from the mind. So, for example, in Kenya, we have got about 10,000 megawatts of potential renewable energy of geothermal. It has not been exploited, it can be exploited. Ethiopia and Uganda enjoys a lot of hydro energy potential. And also, it has not been fully exploited. We've got a lot of hydro energy in DRC. And I can tell you that DRC has so much abundance of hydro energy in the sense that it can power the entire African continent. I have been myself personally in the river Inga. I have seen the falls. We have had some feasibility studies done, and we know it can actually be able to power the entire Africa. This oil, gas, and fossil fuels, I said it contributes about 75% of climate change challenges. And these climate change challenges include drought, include floods, include displacement of people, and those, again, impose security to the people. And therefore, you can see the nexus between renewable energy, which we can actually develop so much. But even as we develop, we can reduce the security challenges, like the issues of flooding, the issues of drought, the issues of displacement, that can be reduced appreciably if we exploit the Eastern African region resources. So the time of action is now, that we need to exploit these potential renewable energy resources. They are abundant. Sunlight is all over. Everywhere we have solar. We have a lot of wind in the entire African continent. We can exploit it. But we know there are challenges of exploiting those resources. The challenges, and I have expounded that in the time of action slides, and there are many. There are about 5 slides on time of action, that we recognize we have these challenges. We recognize we have abundant resources of renewable energy. Therefore, we can exploit the opportunity of the abundance of these renewable resources and mitigate the climate change globally. And what we therefore need to do is to harness the available resources. And we also need to lobby appropriation of most of the climate change resources to the African continent, where a lot of renewable energy is available, so that we can be able to exploit it for the common good of the globe, not for the common good of African continent. It is the common good of the globe, because we have only one planet. whether we have got emissions here, they are still affecting people in America and all over. So we need to appreciate that this is a global problem. It needs cooperation, and we need ourselves as Africans to advocate for appropriation of enough resources so that we can be able to exploit the renewable energy which is abundant and which will mitigate the climate change. Sorry for the technology failure, but this presentation, I would urge everybody to read it because it's an opportunity that is not going to be inhibited by our challenges of governance or economics or whatever. It is very important that we step up the production of renewable energy for the sake of global peace and security. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very, very, very powerful presentation there. Great ideas from a great leader. Kinetic power plant is the way to go. We appreciate that. We now need to do the last one, but I need the tech team to help me bring in Dr. Chaim Udon, who is presenting from New Delhi.
Hello, good morning.
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Welcome. We can hear you loud. You have 10 minutes
Thank you.
to share your
yes,
ideas.
I'll share my presentation.
Thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Chimi Udon, and Research Fellow and Head of Blue Economy and Climate Change Cluster at the National Maritime Foundation in New Delhi. So, I'll be speaking on climate change adaptations in marine ecosystem, a nature-based solution. So, as most of the experts have already discussed how climate change is impacting the Eastern Africa and facing threats from climate change impacts. So I thought I would like to discuss or assert that nature-based solution is a viable adaptation option for Eastern African countries to build resilience, not just the people, but the coastal ecosystem, and also to reduce the impact of climate change. So in this presentation, I would like to focus on the climate change adaptations, marine ecosystem and nature-based solution, mostly from the perspective of India. So first, this is the overview of my presentation. First, I'll discuss how climate change is impacting the coastal urban agglomerations and infrastructures and different approaches of adaptation and best practices. And I'll discuss a bit of the cause and benefits of the nature-based solution and then way forward. As we know that infrastructure, as it is the backbone of the global economy, connecting people and enhancing quality of life and promoting health and safety. Yet climate change is revealing infrastructure vulnerabilities, and climate change could increasingly disrupt critical systems and increase operating costs, exacerbate the infrastructure funding gap, and create sustainable spillover effects on societies and economy. So, in that case, in 2005 alone, average losses suffered by the world's 136 largest coastal cities announced to roughly $6 billion per year, and by so it was projected that by 2050 these losses are expected to soar to at least $52 billion per year, and also it could go as high as $1 trillion per year if climate change and land subsidence significantly worsen. And as we all discussed how it's impacting the Eastern Africa, and it was also suggested that about 30 million Africans live within the flood hazard zone around the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, out of which 2 million are likely to be flooded every year. So without adaptation, we may face that 0.02 and between 0.2 to 4.6% of global population, which might be flooded annually by 2100 years. So in that case, the damage of this magnitude are quite unlikely to be tolerated by our society and the kind of adaptation policies and measures that we have currently. So far as we know that the hard coastal defenses has been the traditional way of protecting our coast from the climate change or if not the natural disasters. As we have seen wall in Rotterdam and breakwater in Visakhapatnam, Sea Deck in France, and Thames Barrier. All of these are possible and the most the traditional way of protecting our coast. But then the expenditure or the money that we have to spend in building these infrastructure are massive, and not only building but the maintenance is huge. And if you look at this, the global cost of protecting the coast with the dikes are significant, with annual investment and maintenance cost of 12 to 71 billion US dollars. It might come across by 2100 years. So this is also without accounting the indirect cost of damage to regional production supply. So the cost of building a hard infrastructure is huge. So what do we do now? So design with nature is something that has been discussing and also is gaining quite a great traction. So what does nature-based solution mean is that I don't want to go into the details because I'm sure everyone knows about it, but then it defines differently by different countries and different institutions. So as per the IUC and the nature-based solution is actions to protect, sustainably manage and restore natural or modified ecosystem that addresses the society challenges effectively and adaptively and simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So it's in line with the ecosystem-based adaptation measures. So that's why I thought since the countries in the global south should focus more on the either ecosystem-based approach or nature-based solutions. So nature-based solution, we know that it solves multiple problems, coastal protection, it also provides social and recreational spaces, ecological resilience, and it also has economic benefits where it is cheaper to build and maintain, or also high, it has better cost-effective returns due to multiple uses. So some of the options that we have is mangrove forest regeneration or restoration of mangrove forests and coral reefs and seagrass meadows. So in that case, if we look at this different landscape that we have here, so nature-based solution can be applied across the different landscape in terms of hazard, where crop failures and livestock loss due to drought or flooding. Then the solution could be crop diversification and agroforestry to enhance food security and diversity. In case of hazard where we face loss of life and assets due to intense wildfires or landslides or soil loss and intense rainfall, we have solutions to protect and restore forests to stabilize soils and show water runoff, and also forest management to reduce the risk of super fires. And in case of the urban flooding due to intense rainfall or heat stress due to urban heat islands, the solution can be increasing green space in urban areas to reduce surface water runoff rates and mitigate against urban heat islands, and also enhance biodiversity to such as green roofs, ponds, and rain gardens. And then several countries now come up with the sponge cities. So another example in the coastal region is that asset loss and yield reduction and contamination due to flooding and due to droughts. And then the nature-based solution could be naturalization of river banks to provide floodplain storage and restore forests and wetland to regulate the flooding water. In terms of the very tip of the coast, the loss of land, livelihoods, asset due to sea level rise, coastal erosion, storm surges, and flooding. So we can have the protect, restore coastal wetlands such as mangrove forests, marshes, and reefs to buffer the coast and absorb floodwaters. So from these, what we can understand is that nature-based solution can be applied across the landscape. And this is the image where you will see the practice of nature-based solution has been taken across the countries. So I wanted to discuss more on from India's perspective what India is doing on nature-based solution. So India has come up with the it has launched India's Forum for Nature-Based Solution. So its main objective is to create a collective of nature-based solution entrepreneurs for government entities, just like-minded organization or countries to help scale urban nature-based solution. So in that case, this is one example that I want to show to you all, coral reef recovery projects in India. So two major projects is going into different states, coastal states. One is marine animals and coral fragments on the dome structure built in Andaman, and which is on the left. And on the right, we have a coral garden nursery in Mithapur in Gujarat. These two, the nature-based solution projects are ongoing, and the rate of success has shown quite a lot. And second, that India currently have its Green Climate Fund targets to recover 5,000 hectares of mangrove. So right now, I've shown only 3 coastal states, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, and Odisha. So all of these states are putting effort in recovering and restoration of mangrove forest system and degraded mangrove forest. And one interesting thing is that the local community or the local communities and stakeholders in the coastal communities are also involved actively in such projects. Because of their involvement, the project also gets higher range of success. So with
Dr.
this,
Yudon,
I wanted
Dr.
to address
Yudon.
that.
Dr. Yudon, if you could come to the conclusion.
Okay, sure. I'll now conclude.
Thank you.
So it provides a coastal resilience. It has also multiple co-benefits, which I will now skip due to interest of time. And I'll come to the So yeah, this is one thing, because the aggregated economic value of mangrove in India right now, it ranges from $112 to $88 to 4,418 8,015 hectares per year. So this is some of the adaptation measures that we have currently: strengthening early warning system, making new infrastructure resilience, improving dryland agriculture, crop production, protecting mangrove. So protecting mangrove shows the highest cost benefit ratio, which is 5:1. So this is another cost and benefit data that we have. And hybrid is also another option where we have green infrastructure and the hard infrastructure, which protects the maximum, which has the maximum benefits to coastal communities. So with this, I wanted to highlight some of the way forward with the Eastern African countries. We can have a cross-sectoral multiple-scale collaboration and ensure stakeholder engagements, especially the local communities, to develop a sense of belonging and ensure proper use and maintenance of nature-based solution, and increase awareness and uptake of nature-based solution in the private sector by showing the cost-benefit ratio. And also, another way to promote is to provide strong incentives and subsidize to innovate, and also give environmental performance bonds to ensure people to pay for any environmental damages they cause, and to also promote public-private partnership and local resources-dependent community participation from the bottom-up approach is also something that we can explore. So the collaborative partnership between governments, private entities, and communities can help address these challenges and support successful implementation. With this, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yudon. Very interesting nature-based solutions. We appreciate your presentation. Sorry about time, but we surely will go through your write-up at the appropriate time. I know, members, I'm standing between you and lunch. but I still have Professor Iraki, who needs to come and give us reflections. If the coordinator, Dr. Asembo, would give us the 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes, there's time between now and 12:30. You can give us, let's just borrow 10, because you put very heavy session within this time. We had 6 presenters. So allow us to have Professor Iraki give us the reflections. I don't mind if you put your questions and comments on a piece of paper in case we don't have enough time to do a discussion. I can receive some of those papers and see how to manage and mainstream your concerns in the report. Thank you. Professor Iraki.
Thank you very much, Dr. Njoroge. I will be very Kenyan and say all protocols observed. Let me start by correcting you. I'm not a professor at Kentucky University, but I used to be there when I was younger and more innocent. Number 2, let me complain that the previous expert, Dr. Ogara, had 4 papers. I've been given 6. Maybe it's because he is older than me, so I was given more work. I'm up to task. So I'll make a few comments, then comment on each of the presentation, and then make my conclusion. And let me start by making clear that the issue of climatic change is very real from my own experience. Where I grew up, and I'm not going to disclose where I grew up for security reasons. In the last few years, I've seen new crops that never used to grow, they are growing. We never used to grow beans, now we are growing beans because it is warmer. I've seen some insects that I never used to see there, like mosquitoes. Now I see them. And because we grow pears and plums, I've seen those 2 types of fruits confused. Either they are ripening earlier or ripening later. And as we talk now, that place is supposed to be very wet. There's no rain. And if you have read Nairobi long enough, you know how the weather has been behaving. I don't know how many of you read international news. This morning I was looking at some news from Europe about the receding glaciers because of global warming. And they are finding very interesting things. Soldiers who died in World War II are now being exposed by the receding glaciers. They are finding the remains of a plane that went down 50 years ago. Because of the receding glacier, they are seeing letters, newspapers, and so on. So if anybody says you are not convinced that there is no global warming, no climatic change, I don't think you are right. Even President Trump, by now, I'm sure he is convinced. Dr. Kimuyu, you made the first presentation. And what I was interested in is the use of data and ICT. And what I was interested in, and we should be interested in, is that data timely? Is that data acceptable? You talked of technology acceptance model. What I'm thinking about is having data or technology that is like M-Pesa, accessible to everybody. So that if I'm looking for data or information on climatic change, wherever I am, I can access it, the way everybody uses M-Pesa. So that's what I'm looking for. So whether I'm in energy, food, logistics, or any other area, I should be able to get that information and see how I can mitigate climatic change and even, if possible, adaptation. And I was curious, Dr. Kimuyu, on whether you consider the millennials. The millennials need very different type of data. When my students write SMSs to me, I call them and ask them what they are saying, because they talk a different language. Now let me give you an example of why this information is important and why it would mitigate climatic change and help adaptation. At the height of COVID, I was very idle at home. And I'm not boasting, I'm just informing you. I have a piece of rad along Thika Road. And I wondered what to do with it. And somebody told me the grapevine that I can plant grapes. And I told him, I know grapes grow in South Africa or North Africa. Along Eastern Bypass, I got some seed and planted grapes. And believe it or not, last year, I harvested some grapes. So very soon, in the supermarket, you see XN Pinotage, XN Chardonnay, XN Marot. Yeah, this looks like people of wine. Watu wa pombe wako pande ile. Dr. Nizao, where are you? I'm sure you must be a golfer because you kept on talking about follow through. What is your handicap? Can talk about that later on. I like the way you brought in the issue of governance. And what I should be looking at or asking is, how can this governance be incorporated at the national level, county level, farm level, and even in our homes? Because governance is a big issue. And if, Dr. Nzau, you listen to the devolution conference, then you understand why it is such a big issue. Not just in climatic change, but everywhere. So I would want you to look at this governance, not just from the point of view of climatic change, but everything, because they are related. And I quote an Indian, Amartya Sen, who won a Nobel Prize, where he argued that democratic countries rarely suffer from famine. So do you think if we get more democratic countries, we are going to have better mitigation for climatic change? I think that's an issue you need to address. Dr. Shiraho, I liked your cap, your cap that you are wearing. It betrays your political orientation, but you can confirm that later on. I like the way you connected instability and climatic change. And Dr. Monica Juma mentioned that yesterday when she was talking about Sahel. All the chaos in the Sahel are interconnected with climatic change. Not just the failure of institutions, but also climatic change. Last year I went to Nanyuki in a forum that was hosted by World Food Programme. And I remember one gentleman telling us how chaos in northern Kenya or semi-arid areas always go together with rain. When the rain starts falling, all those chaos disappear. Because when it's not raining, people are competing for resources. And I believe we have people from security department here. They should connect that. You also mentioned, Dr. Shiraho, that a bigger East African community would be good for stability. And I believe it will also be good for solutions. We should get better solutions for climatic problems. But I was not very happy with the adjectives you are using. Gurag, carcass. How can you call a country carcass? Finally, you talked so much about the legacy of colonialism. You seem to blame colonialism for our problems, which I think is okay. But I want to ask you in good faith. The world's leading superpower, US, used to be a colony of UK. How come they have done so well? I think we must stop using colonialism as dustbins. But I agree with you, we need to do more research that is more appropriate to our problems. One time, I'll be fast at Dr. Njoroge. One time I asked my students why Africans have loud hearts. Why do we build loud hearts? And the reason is simple. They are more stable, and if you use calculus, you cover more material with a round shape than rectangular or square shape. But there's a student who told me, I want to support one of you. I think it was Dr. Maweo. She told me, I remember it was Shashi. Now she's a corporate CEO somewhere. I met her the other day. She told us that we build loud hearts so that evil spirits have no corners to hide. So no matter how we get advanced, we must always look at our indigenous rights. You might appear taller than me, but at one time you are my student. And if you did not make a good presentation, I was very eager to disclose to this audience the grade that I get you, or the grade that I gave you. But you lived to my expectations, so I not disclose. One of the things that I was expected from Dr. Njoroge, and we can talk that over lunch or later on, is you should have told us or shared with us what are the renewable energy dividends in Kenya. 90% of Kenya's energy is now coming from renewable sources. But have we got the dividends in terms of raw prices? And by extension, we stop using other sources of energy. So I think that's a mystery you should have shared with us. I've been to Orokaria 2 weeks ago. I loved the wells. I love the technology being used. But when it comes to technology, you should also have mentioned that Murika Mwizi, that is very common in villages, has really improved on security. That's a part of the security you are referring to. You are likely to find Murika Mwizi for people on this side and what two are leafy suburbs. So this is okay. Don't need to worry about that. And finally, Dr. Njoroge, Dr. Monica Juma yesterday talked about the weakest link in mitigation of climatic change. We might have all the renewable energies in this country, but we cannot escape pollution from other countries because rivers, weed do not respect borders. So you should have demanded that this mitigation must be intergenerational, it must be international, so everybody must participate. Finally, Dr. Yudon, thank you very much. When I was in high school, my mathematics teacher, my physics teacher, my chemistry teacher was of Indian descent, so I owe Indians a debt. And I like the way she put it, that she can come up with solutions. There are solutions that India has tried to come up with. And my belief is India is more advanced than Kenya, so why don't we try and use their solutions? Why don't we stop reinventing the wheel? Some of the Kenyans, some of them might be here, have gone to India for medical services. So can we also learn from India when it comes to climatic change mitigation policies and strategies, because they are very good at. Those of you who have interest in space, later today, I don't know whether it has already taken place, one of the Indian space probes should be landing on the southern part of the moon, and I hope that will be a success. So we can learn out from India. We have 536 kilometers of coastline. So when we talk about these issues about maritime, about climatic change, our coastline will be affected, and India, I'm sure, can help us solve that problem. I'm also very happy that in addition to Dr. Yudon, we had somebody else from Israel yesterday, and Dr. Kabage. I'm very happy that we are getting ideas from other parts of the world, because we cannot reinvent the wheel when the wheel is there. Let me conclude and make sure that you go for lunch by saying that one of my biggest concerns is how do we get these great ideas in this hall and cascade them to the grassroots? Because 71% of Kenyans are in the rural areas. They are the people most affected by climatic change, although they cause the climatic change. So I'm hoping that we are going to have something like bottom-up economics model when it comes to climatic change, so that the people at the bottom of the pyramid can also benefit from the ideas we are discussing there. The question we should be asking is how do we reach the critical mass of Kenyans so that as many people as possible benefit from this discussion? I think that should be one of our objectives. Is it possible that we can translate these presentations in Swahili or local languages so that as many people as possible understand what we are discussing? I must confess that the people who have presented today in my session, you enlightened us, you have provoked us into action, and you played your part in making this planet a better home. Let me quote my student, we don't have planet B. Thank you very much, and enjoy your lunch.
Professor, there is a seat for you here.
Oh, I need to sit up here.
Just in case they want to interact a little, Dr. Asembo has given us some 15 minutes between now and the lunch break. Before I ask the panelists to respond, we might want to take some questions. I already have one, written one, but if Professor Midabo can get, can get a mic, or I donate mine. Let me see where they are. Number one. No, sorry, 2, 3, 4. This is number 1, 4, 5. Thank you. Watu wa pande hii. Watu wa left side. You know I'm left-handed. No hand. Ama iko kwa makaratasi? Thank you. I have some papers here, and you can keep them coming because this is very, very central to our nations as East African going forward. Technology research and climate change. Professor, I know you speak.
Yes.
Summarized.
Thanks. I summarized it. My question is directly to my friend, Dr. Mumo, and to some extent, Dr. Yudon. In 1969, Chairman Mao toured throughout Africa, and at the end, he made a statement that Africa was ready, because I spent 7 months at University of Pudong as a visiting scholar. Was that Africans must change their mindset and must take responsibility from the colonialism to set their settlement, their biodiversity, so that we take control of ourselves. Now, when you're looking at the human settlement itself. Nairobi is moving to Kiambu, which is a really deep, fertile soil for agriculture, and turning it into concrete jungle. And then our human settlement everywhere, we're spreading instead of coming together in a township and living together and then preserve the rest of the land for agriculture, for food security. South Korea has done just that. How can we change in Kenya so that we have a biodiversity which is guided through human settlement?
Thank you very much. Number two. Number two. It's over there.
Thank you. My question goes to Dr. Mweu, who was talking about gender. I listened to her presentation, and the recommendations and conclusions are talking to communication, use of mobile phone, but there is absolutely no recommendation or conclusion that targets women. So what kind of communication and sources of information did you identify that speaks to women in particular and specifically?
Thank you so much. My comment regards the presentation made by Dr. Weston. And I'm so much intrigued, as an economist, I'm so much intrigued by the aspect of governance, especially on climate smart financing. It's not a question, it's a comment, because there is a researcher also made a comment that are we using the blame game dating back to the colonial times. I think it's very critical to know that the colonial kind of system shaped, to be specific to in regard to climate financing, it shaped our financial institutions, it shaped the way our legal system works, and that has an implication, for example, in terms of the commercial law, that at times still going back to these laws that are dated 1900, some of these laws are actually there. So it's very important to revise these laws. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I think I was the fourth one.
Yes, you are.
My beneficiaries of flower farms are in this country, the products of flower farms in this country. And if we do, are those beneficiaries, do they have land, and why can they grow or do what is done in Kenya? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think there was, where was I? Here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Was there somebody on that side? I think we'll do one round because I have very many here. And then continue the conversation.
Can I proceed?
Lunch. Go on.
Thank you. My question goes to, I think, all the panelists and any other participant who can respond. And this is with regard to how we communicate climate change issues. And here I am not talking about language. I've heard the presenters talking about the language used. I'm talking package, the message. Because for me, this is the missing link in all this effort. Because we gather in conferences like this, we gather in events like the ones in Sharm el-Sheikh and the one that will take place in Nairobi. We come up with documents, like here we will have a communique. We come up with scientific press releases. We talk about levels of CO2 emissions, how they are high, how everything is, the ice is melting, and all those statistics. But then the anti-climate change activists simply respond by saying fake news. And that's it. And they are gaining traction. They are ahead of us in that game. If you look at, for example, the former president of America, you would say, we will say in this report, look at this page, this figure, and the response, fake news. And that picks up. So what I'm trying to say, in terms of climate change communication, we need to climb down from the pedestal and probably get an equivalent of fake news that reply to put across our message. Because as it is, we are operating on different planes. They are at that level, we are at this level, and unfortunately, they are winning. Thank you.
Allow me, members, to just read out some of the other questions. And my dear panelists, kindly, I hope you have picked those questions because you have a minute each. We must finish by 12:30, not very visible, but I hope Dr. Asembo is still gracious with the 2 minutes. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Weston, a question for you. How can we rally East Africa to a common position beyond the fossil and emotion politics? Global North, hegemonic posturing. I hope you understand. That's from M. Aendi. Dr. Kimuyu, do you have some recommendations on ICT solutions from your research that could be applied in conflict situations? The way ICT is used in quelling violence in DRC with MONUSCO. This is a comment, I'll just read it. It was meant for Jacinta, Dr. Maweu. The Ministry of Environment does not have environmental officers in the counties. Engineer, there's one for you. While renewable energy is the way, have you heard of some works or research showing the impact of wind power installation on the soils in the way of desiccation? Effect of wind power installation on soils. Then we have another one. Dr. Udon, this is for you. I hope she's still online. As much as we want to focus on homegrown solutions to climate change, we still need to have a collective framework to hold the global north accountable to them being the biggest greenhouse gases emitters. Holding the global north accountable. We need climate financing towards evidence generation to support or address the intersection of climate change and gender. This is for you, Dr. Mara. Health, etc., so that we can have context-specific programs. And this, maybe the policy people could also mention something in response to that. The last one, what is the place of artificial intelligence in getting solutions for climate change-related challenges? I think this is for you, ICT. Are Kenyan researchers doing anything towards digitizing climate change communication to reach the masses? I think those questions are heavy. They are very relevant. And I would like these panelists to give a shot at each of them in a very precise, starting with you, Dr. Kimuyu. Thank you.
Yes, allow me just to respond. Am I audible? Okay, thank you, thank you. I'll briefly comment on the how to communicate climate change issues. I believe we need what we may call a climate change communication strategy. So that one can be taken as part of the output. And of course, out of the strategy, then you can make a climate change communication policy. And this will be able to package properly the message to the masses. Jump to the question on artificial intelligence in getting solutions to climate change. Yes, we have a lot of simulations that can be done. We don't need to wait to see what 2060 will look like. We can simulate what 2060 will look like now. And when that simulation has been done through, of course, artificial intelligence, we can be able to take corrective action before we wait for the actual time to be able to arrive. And that is just one of the examples. On the issues of digitization of climate change information, yes, I've already talked that ICT is not considered as a player now within the climate change action plan. But once it's brought on board, that means now it is funded, yes. The experts will be called and upon all the discussions to take it up. And of course, in the 3rd annual conference, we can be able to see how best to tackle this issue. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Very fast. Professor Iraki, those words are heavy. Gulag, political caucus. But I'll take you back to 94 in Rwanda when genocide was taking place. The UN refused to use the word genocide. And that meant that there was inaction. So it's important that you call it what it is. When you say political caucus, it simply means we can't approve what's going on in Congo. It must stop. When we talk about Gulag in Eritrea, we don't approve of what's going on in Eritrea, which is affecting the citizens. So I think naming, nomenclature, calling a problem precisely what it is, puts you in better position to diagnose and come up with appropriate solutions. Climate change financing, yes. My colleague from Uganda, you're spot on. Because in as much as there are other parts of the world that were colonized, in Africa, colonialism had a far deeper impact. It destroyed the individual. That is very unique to Africa. And therefore, if I speak about governance and not bring in the aspect of the colonial legacy, I risk falling prey to what it means. You just profile African politicians. They're corrupt, they're tribal, they are rent seekers. Well, there are all those things, but there's a history and explanation to that which has to be brought out. It's not blame game. It's basically having a bird's eye approach and analysis. Who are the beneficiaries of flowers in, my colleague who read that question, I don't understand why it's not pricking our conscience as a country. The flower farms, the multinationals, what they are doing particularly in Thika and those places, Del Monte, those things shouldn't be happening over 60 years after the colonialists left, where locals are hunted down and shot at and run over by vehicles. We cannot allow that, because that's what is sovereignty and liberation and freedom all about. And why? Why do we still so diligently protect local foreign interests at the expense of the Kenyan people? We can't allow that. And then how do we rally, which takes me to the other question, how do we rally the East African community beyond the emotional politics of global? it's political. This politics is political because the politics of subjugation, of deprivation, of exploitation, it's emotional because it involves lives. If we are not emotional about matters of life and death, then where are we? That's where humanity is. So there's this tendency to think that it's only a rational human being who is a normal human being. No. Plato talks about the tripartite nature of the human person. You are emotional, you are intelligent, and you are appetitive. And if any one of those is missing, you are an impoverished human person. So people should not be scared of being emotional. It's normal. So I think I end on that, and I say within the whole realm of climate change, we have to be cautious about certain terminologies like benchmarking, globally competitive international standards, because what they do basically, they make us valorize and celebrate alien and foreign solutions as opposed to our own. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I want to begin by appreciating the comment from Dr. Iraki about men. When you're talking about gender and climate change communication, the role of men as the most destructive, for sure. I want to follow up, to pick up with, can we package climate change communication? And I would say, yes, that is a gap. We need to expose that. And when you're talking about effective climate change communication, then it's about sensitizing and unpacking and educating these men not to be as destructive. There was a question about that there is a recommendation about local languages. What is it that we found about women? I did say that one of the issues that we found is that the person who had asked, and I'm Maweu, not Mweu, that women know about their information needs. They know about the deficits, and they know what sort of information they need and how it should be packaged. And you asked which sources of information was most appropriate. I did say it was mobile phones and radio, and that is why in the conclusions you're saying that the policymakers need to tap into the same way that Iraki is talking about climate information being as accessible as M-Pesa. So then let them tap harness the availability of mobile phones so that climate information is available to these women through mobile phones, because they told us that there are some NGOs that have been disseminating climate information through that, and it has been accessible to them. And then radio, local language radio stations. Then someone notifies me that there are no environmental officers at the county level. I don't remember saying that, and if it was implied, what I meant is that we talk to at the county offices, we have climate change desks, and we have environmental, and we have agricultural. I mean, there is devolution of that. So those are the guys we talk to. I don't know where that came from. Okay. Yeah, that is all.
Thank you very much. So this mic has to think whether to respond to my voice or not. Now it has. I'm told by our support team that some of you still want to ask some questions, and Dr. Asembo has given us an extra 5 minutes. Can I see by a show of hands those who would like to ask questions? Or do you want to put them down as we address the others that are coming? Yes. Oh, there's somebody online? If there's somebody online, kindly put in the chat box, and then...
May I...
Yes. But Dr. Yudon will give you a moment. Just hold on.
Sure.
I'll receive any question that you have in this room through the handwritten form. The chat box, I'm sure there's somebody managing that, can just give me what the question is, then I can direct it to the respective panelists. Dr. Yudon, you ready? Before engineer, just a minute. Yudon, please.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I think I received a question on the global north, how to hold them accountable. So I think being in the global south, we do know that global north is responsible for the historical emission of carbon dioxide. But then that's my personal view. But then my personal view is that even though they are responsible for the emitting large chunk of carbon dioxide emission in the atmosphere, but then global south countries like Eastern Africa, India, and the South Asian countries are the one who gets hit first and the hardest by the climate change impact. So instead of blaming, but then the word that I'm using is because we shouldn't wait them to we shouldn't wait them as in the global north, wait for them to take accountable. Instead, what we should do is maybe we can push more on the climate funding, and then we should stick or have a south-south partnership in terms of common but differentiated responsibility plus respective capabilities. That's something that we should push forward. And from global south, and we should focus more on the adaptation part of it, because climate change is something, climate change mitigation is something that the global north is trying to push us to do. But then I feel since the technology and the people that we have, the developing people, so we have a lot more to do, but then focus should be on the adaptation. And then with adaptation, we can build resilience of our people and the coastal community and the coastal ecosystem. And then only we can think about carbon emission, a reduction of carbon emission. But then so what I notice is in the most of the global south, we tend to focus more on how to build renewable energy and the reduction of carbon emission, but the focus should be on the adaptation. That is something that I want to highlight. And second thing, what can also help is focusing more on the blue economy. The concept itself is gaining some traction across the world, and also African, I've seen they also are working on mostly on the ocean economy. But then what I want, which is reaching also the African countries and then in the seabed mineral resources. So in that case, also we should focus more on the blue economy and nature-based solution that I've discussed. So cost is something that is very less compared to the hard or the traditional method of the adaptation methods. So that is something that I wanted to highlight. I think I could
thank you very much.
Across my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yudon. Before we bring in engineer, I have 5 questions. Allow me to just, some are comments, but I think it's good for this audience to hear. Professor Iraki, you will address most of this because I'll give you 1 minute at the end to wrap up. So then the first question here is that there is a gap in skills and expertise. What actions is this forum taking to address this quagmire? Number 2, what practical solutions are going forward that this forum will project in terms of boosting regulatory framework, methodologies for implementing regulatory frameworks and policies? 3, local community engagement. This, I think, has already been addressed. Then, Dr. Mumo, you are back. There's one for you. What are the practical technological solutions this forum can embrace and put forward for policy implementation. Just in a statement. And Professor Iraki, there is one other one here. What is the possible roadmap that this forum can design to assist inculcate in our curriculum for our schools and institutions of learning? And the last one is just a comment for us to hear out this particular participant. Does, I think he meant, do the ideas manufactured in this forum reach the policy makers? In other words, do we just talk to ourselves, we finish 2 days and go home, wait for another year, come and continue? Number 2, and does the leadership of this forum follow through for implementation? I don't know who is the best person among the organizers to yes, so director guides that as we close the session this afternoon, those issues that have to do with what we do, with what we recommend, will be addressed, and how we reach whoever needs to be reached.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And I also want to thank my former lecturer because, yes, you have asked very pertinent questions. Fortunately, all those questions are addressed in the entire presentation, only that we were fueled by technology and we were not able to see them. But then I'll make sure I share with you this presentation so that you can appreciate. Number one, you asked about the cost of renewable energy. And I want to say, yes, the cost of renewable energy is very dramatically reducing. I do remember in 15 years' time, when we were working on solar energy, where the cost was about 20 US cents per kilowatt hour. As we speak today, it has gone down to as low as 5 cents per kilowatt hour, especially for large power plants. What is suggested in that paper that I did is that the Eastern African region countries need to pool together and create what I would want to call a larger mass of demand, and therefore be able to come up with the implementation of huge projects which will give a lot of benefit of the economics of scale, and the cost will still go much down. That is well covered. There was the issue of weed, the impact of weed on soils. It doesn't have any impact on soils. Wind turbines, the ones which rotate, are about 15 to 55 meters above ground. And therefore, they are so far away from the soil that they don't have any impact. And that's why you realize in most of the areas where these turbines are planted, you'll even find cows grazing below because grass is growing normally as it used to grow. So there is no any impact on the soil. Professor, you also talked about the fact that I have talked much about what we need to do, but this is a global problem. But in that presentation, I've also said that what we need in the East African region mainly is the resources. And because we have that opportunity of utilizing these renewable energy resources, we need to lobby, we need to put up our case that we have a lot of abundant renewable energy and which will mitigate climate change to everybody. So we demand, and we actually would demand that we be given or appropriated more resources to develop these renewable energy resources. And therefore, that will be a global contribution, not just for the Eastern African region. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. On though? Oh, right there. It just came on. Thank you very much for this feedback. Chair, very good, incisive feedback from Professor Iraqi and the questions from the floor. I want to go back to, I think in my discussion I didn't quite wind up on what I was talking about, the 3 empirical dimensions of governance that were proposed by Professor Hayden in 1989. Responsive and responsible leadership. Number 2, citizen oversight. And number 3, social reciprocity. If we can infuse those 3 requisite ingredients that make up a good recipe for governance, and we take them, we cascade them through all levels, including our local governance through, a county system, and so, very local governance kind of outlook, it would add a lot of value. And in my paper, I'm pointing to a number of things. Number 1, let us harmonize and get right the policy, legal, and institutional frameworks for climate change, climate action, climate adaptation at all levels. State, local, state, regional, through our regional structures, and global. Then we capacity build, we mainstream, we coordinate, and we ensure that we enforce, that's what I was saying, follow through, Professor, commitment. Because if we can do that, then we will get it right in all aspects. And Professor Midamba is pointing to the question of values. And other people have said it, including the 3rd question there from the gentleman just behind Professor, who talked about these anti-thesis activists. And if we can infuse into our societal psyche, political psyche, and center the whole idea that there's a problem with the climate and we must start it somewhere. In our schools, we need to build a value system. Just like we wake up to work and look for money and to build and to do what, and to national wealth and so on, we have to make it part of the value system at all levels. And then as we now attack the higher levels, and people are asking, what about policy? Because they are hardliners. There are people who don't want change because what they are doing is wealth creation for their countries and something like that, and therefore they can't afford to stop. And others are saying, no, whatever we are all doing is harming the environment. And if we can all agree and mainstream and harmonize that kind of thinking, then it will add value in terms of what governance can do for climate change adaptation, climate change action going forward, and I think really that is the crux of the matter. And Professor, and the whole idea of narratives is sort of constructivists, as it were. There are people who take this kind of neo-Marxist, or what you would call a postmodern approach to these things. But if we can have a value system that everybody respects, then policy, and we infuse that into our policy, legal, institutional frameworks, it can work at all levels of governance. And these things we are doing will make sense and they will sustain, given the gravity and the importance of this subject area. Thank you. Is a global common.
Thank you.
Thank
you, Dr.
Thank you,
Momo.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, Professor. Just
I'll
pick
take
up 1 or 2.
I'll take 1 minute,
Yes.
and Dr. Shiraho, if I can follow up your argument, it means that the word shithole used by Trump is appropriately used. We can discuss that over the lunch hour. I will respond to a few things. One of them was an encroachment of Kiambu from Dr. Bidaba. Is an issue, but let me give you some interesting background. In 1927, my father tried to get land at the present-day Tatu City. I'm not that old. I only happen to be the son of the younger wife. But he didn't get that land. because that clan said there's a curse that stopped them from selling land. But today that land is gone. So unless we can stop capitalists, I don't see encroachment to Kiambu stopping, or unless the government comes with a law, zoning law that says this land must be kept for this. But as long as it's free for all, everybody will go there. So policy must be changed, as my friend says. Colonialism, I always get amused by this topic. Because you tell me your name is John Kennedy, your name is Catherine, and then you're talking about colonialism. So I think we can change that legacy by participating. It is very clear in our constitution that you are allowed to participate in public decisions. So if there's anything you want to change, just be a public participant. But we don't turn up because we think that our voice cannot change. We participate, we also vote. Number 4, I agree there's a gap in skills and expertise in climatic change. But if you read the paper on Monday, I don't know how many of you looked at it, the education section in the Standard. Some of the courses that had the fewest number of students applicants who are actually in climatic change. So I think we need the government to subsidize such courses so that even if there are few people, they can build the numbers in the future. Because some of the ideas that are current might not be that apparent to the students who are young and not very informed. Regulatory framework, how to change it, participate. Don't just vote your MP or your MC and leave him until 2027. Follow up. That's why you voted for him, so that if there is any changes that have to be made, you can call him, you can go for public or that. Road design for integrating climatic change to the curriculum, we can do that. We can integrate in all the subjects, but focus on applications. If I supervise you in my class or you come to my class, there's a word I don't allow you to use in a dissertation, the word charge. I want solutions. This is the problem we have in this country. You always talk about charges, no solutions. So if we can bring solutions to people at every level in this country, rural areas, urban areas, I'm sure they will be able to see how climatic change is affecting them and how they will benefit in the short run, in the long run. Thank you, Dr. Njoroge.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. I want to bring, I don't know what the hand means, that lifted hand. Oh, there was an online chat. Who could either let me see, but allow me as that comes to thank my panelists. You must agree with me that really this was a very exciting session. And wrapping it up, I can say that you need to agree with us as a panel that research does play a big role in guiding implementation of action plans. But the other thing that has come out is we need to work on our governance structures, policy frameworks, so that we are guided into how best either to achieve those action plans, or number 2, how to collaborate with whoever we need to collaborate with, but also not forget that the agenda issues. One of the things that Professor Iraki raised was this: do men destroy the environment more than women? Quote unquote. We need to find out whether that is true, and if not, what are the key gender issues that we need to be cognizant about as we do adaptation and mitigation plans. And the last one is, once we've done all this research and brought up all these technologies that could be a solution, how best do we communicate to the end users? Whether we are talking of policymakers, politicians, I like Shilaho's statement, it's political. But these things can be political, but we know how to also communicate to the politicians and to do our politics and do them well. I think it's a message that came even from yesterday. I'm waiting for the... Oh, online. One person. Okay. I'm challenged as a professor, but Yeah, let me just finish and say that there are some people online who would like to talk. Is it appreciate this was very, very productive, and we want, as a panel, and my own behalf, to sincerely thank you and pray that you keep this up. With that, I thank you, my dear listeners. You're also participants. You asked all the questions that could be asked. We're going to do a clapping this way. A 3 factorial. You know a 3 factorial? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then 1. That we will have appreciated each other. And 3 is the number of unity, that we remain united. Let's go. 1, 2. We repeat. It's a supplementary. It's 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, then 1. Let's go. Thank you. Thank you very much. Enjoy lunch.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's clap once again for the team. Thank you very much. We had planned for an early lunch for you today, because we would like the next session to begin at 1:45. But as we go for lunch, I want to leave you with some reflections. As I sat here, I was doing some mathematics, and I felt that there is something we need to reflect on as we go for lunch. And that I want to take you.
Just call us to order.
Yes. Good. I want to take you down the memory lane in relation to to climate change, and get some something food for thought as we take our lunch. That in 1827, Joseph Fourier, mathematician, was a French mathematician, discovered the greenhouse effect. In 1896, Svante Arrhenius calculated the level of carbon dioxide leading to global warming. In 1958, Charles Keeling begins to measure the carbon dioxide at Lower Observatory in Hawaii. In 1965, we got the first report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was published. In 1988, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issues a special report on the detection of climate change. In 2001, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issues its third assessment, and they conclude that it is very likely that human activities are the main cause of climate change. In 2013, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change releases its fifth assessment and concludes that it is extremely likely that human activities are the main cause. In 2015, the Paris Agreement is adopted by 196 countries, which commit to taking action to limit global warming to well below Celsius, and preferably 1.5 above the pre-industrial levels. Now, this is 2013, and the debate started in 1827. If you minus 2013 and 1827, what do you get? 2013 minus 1827? It's 196. And that is the number of countries that signed the Paris Agreement in 2015. And this tells us that this is the year of climate change. That is, if at all there is anything that humanity must do to climate change, it is in 2023, because every country that signed the Paris Agreement has a stake in it. Let's go for lunch. Let's come back at 1:45. Thank you.